Okay, so welcome everybody. I'm delighted that Sara Wolkenfeld is joining us this evening. Sara is in charge of education, I believe, for Sefaria. And what Sefaria is, hopefully I'll have a better answer an hour from now. And with that, the floor is yours, Sara.
Amazing, thank you. I like that introduction. That was good, short and sweet. So hi everyone, my name is Sara Wolkenfeld. I am, as David mentioned, the Chief Learning Officer at Sefaria. I'll tell you more about Sefaria in a minute. I'm really happy to be here with you tonight. I'm sorry I can't join you in person. I live not that far away. I'm joining you from Lakeview, but right now, of course, everything feels very far away. So I'm sorry to only be able to do this on Zoom, but I'm still happy to see you even virtually. And I'm excited to get to introduce you to Sefaria. I know a little bit about some of the amazing education work that David does in your community. I hear good things about your classes, and I can say, I think with some confidence, that Sefaria is the website that helps to power a lot of the teaching that happens. And so I'm excited to take you a little bit behind the scenes and show you what this website is and how you can even use it for yourselves. So I will share my screen, and I will also share a source sheet with you in case you want to look at it before, during, or after. So I'm going to put a link into the chat that will go to everybody. So if you click on that link, you'll see what I'm going to show you, but I'm also going to share my screen so that I can take you through some different pieces of the website. But I want you to be able to go to it on your own afterwards. So this way you have all the information. Let me just make sure I can share my screen. Okay, great. So hopefully you can all see my screen now, which is great. It just means that I won't be able to see you as well. And I know some of you have your cameras off anyway. So I will pause periodically for your questions. We're a small group, so you're welcome to either put your questions in the chat or to unmute yourselves and share your question that way. But I'm not a great multitasker, and I won't be checking the chat while I'm actually talking. So I'll welcome your questions when I pause. So tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Jerusalem in the text, and I understand that you will have a great class more focused on Jerusalem to follow. I'm going to show you how to learn a little bit more about the topic of Jerusalem as a topic that comes up in Jewish texts really throughout Jewish history, but beginning with and including ancient Jewish texts, the Bible, rabbinic literature, etc. And to do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about Sefaria, which is the website that I work for. It was founded in 2013, and the mission was to lower barriers to Jewish learning and make Torah freely accessible to anyone who has an internet connection. So as I was signing on, as we were all gathering, there were some comments about the bookshelf behind me. I do have a lot of books behind me, and that's great. I love books, and everyone at Sefaria loves books. But there's obviously a cost to books, and nobody can own all the books. And it was really important to me, to my team, to the co-founders of Sefaria, that everyone be able to access Torah, whether or not you have a Bible on your shelf behind you. So those days when you can't make it to temple, when you can't make it to synagogue, to be able to nonetheless have the books of our tradition, that was really, really important to Sefaria's co-founders. And our co-founders are not Jewish educators, and they're not rabbis. Their names are Josh Foer and Brett Loxbizer. Josh was and is a journalist and an author, and Brett was at the time a project manager at Google. But they met when they were in high school. They went on an Israel summer trip together in high school, and they stayed in touch, and they developed this vision to have an open library of Jewish texts on the internet. And the openness piece is very important to us. And there'll be a quiz on this later. No, not really. There'll be a question, a trick about this later. So I want you to remember it now. Sefaria doesn't own any of the texts that I'm going to show you. We release texts into the Creative Commons so that they belong to everyone. So that means that you might not think that something like the Torah can be copyrighted, right? That big scroll that you hold up, let's say that you unroll on Shavuot and look at, that doesn't seem like something that could be under copyright. But of course, modern printings of all of these books can be under copyright. And Sefaria wanted these texts to be open to everybody without copyright. So that's something that we work very hard on. And so we're really building the digital infrastructure for Torah learning. If any of you are actually app developers or computer engineers, then you'll know what I mean when I say that our website is open source. And if you're not any of those things, then you might not, because I didn't before I came to Sefaria. But it basically means that everything that we build on our site, the code that's used to build the website, is all freely available. So really, when I say that this is all for you, it really is. And in addition to the website, Sefaria has an iOS app. So if you have an iPhone or if you have an Android phone, Torah can be with you wherever you go. We have apps for both of those. So that's just a little bit of background on Sefaria. And this sheet that I just shared with you was made on Sefaria. And I think it is really exciting to be working for a project that's devoted to making Torah available to all, but it's a challenge a little bit. And I'll show you why. Let's see. I'm going to go into the site itself, which is hopefully going to load for me. Okay. This is Sefaria's, about to take you into Sefaria's library page. And so our first job at Sefaria was to build out this library. And actually the first job that I ever had at Sefaria was to make a list of the top 10 books that we needed to put on Sefaria. If I asked you all to make that list, I bet that your list would be almost identical to mine. It's pretty easy because the 5 books of the Torah are your first 5. So it wasn't a very hard list to make. It was pretty easy to name the top 10 texts. It got harder after that. Each next top 10 list was harder and harder to think of what are the most important things. But really what Sefaria wants is to have everything, but everyone's everything is different, a little bit different. We could probably all agree on Torah, but we might have other opinions about or other disagreements about what are actually the most important books. This is our library of texts. You can see that we've tried to have all of the categories of works, and we're trying to really fill those in as much as possible. And whenever possible, we want to have those books available in both Hebrew and English. Also other languages. I don't know if any of you here speak other languages natively or fluently, but we would eventually like to have these texts in all the languages in which they exist. The tricky part is, again, because we don't own the rights to any of these works, we have to only put up what's legal according to copyright law. And of course, English texts are much more likely to be under copyright than Hebrew texts. So the Bible in Hebrew, really not under copyright. English translations of the Bible, most of them are actually still under copyright. English books just haven't been around for long enough that they would have all passed out of copyright. So that's a challenge for us. But the biggest challenge is that our books, the books of our tradition, the books that make up a traditional Jewish bookshelf, are really mostly not organized topically. So you might know, if I click here on Tanakh, you might know that's the Hebrew Bible. And if I asked you, what's the book of Genesis about? What's the book of Exodus about? What's the book of Leviticus about? You might be able to tell me, or you might name like a highlight of each book. Maybe not Leviticus. Leviticus doesn't have as many highlights, but Genesis, probably you'd be able to tell me some highlights of the book of Genesis. But this isn't a friendly view for people who are trying to find texts by topic, because again, that's not how most of our books are organized. And it is how most people want to approach Sefaria. So our topic for tonight is Jerusalem. And it was really important to us to build a way into the text for people so that if you want to know more about where does Jerusalem show up in the Jewish library, you could actually find that. And so anytime you're on Sefaria, there's a search bar at the top. And I'm just going to type in the word Jerusalem. There are a lot of options, but one of them is this one, #Jerusalem. And I'm going to click there. And now Sefaria will give me all of the sources that it knows about Jerusalem. It will as soon as it loads, which it's doing slowly because I'm running Zoom at the same time. It's kind of an amazing thing. I think that everything that our computer engineers do is basically magic. And again, once upon a time, you would have had to have a huge amount of Jewish knowledge just to filter texts in this way. Like I wouldn't know just from looking at the book of Psalms that there are all these references to Jerusalem. I don't remember if I knew that there's a reference to Jerusalem in the book of Genesis. And Sefaria will give me all of this information. which is, again, I think kind of magical and amazing that you can find all of this. But the idea is that you can approach the website with a question like, where is Jerusalem mentioned in Jewish texts? And you can find it just through the search. So these are texts that our algorithm has selected as being relevant to Jerusalem. You can get a little description of the city of Jerusalem. And on the side here where it says related, these are other topics that our system believes are related to Jerusalem. So people who search for Jerusalem will also search for things like Land of Israel and Yom Yerushalayim and Holiness and Temple Mount and all these other topics, which are definitely related topics to Jerusalem. And if you click on any of these, like Israel, then you'll get to the topics page for the country of Israel or the land of Israel. And again, you'll be able to see all of those different resources. I want to pause to see if anyone has questions before I go on. For which I should maybe check the chat also.
Definitely magical.
It is magic, right? I think so. Since I don't speak engineering, I just tell our engineers that I think everything that they do is magic. But this is a really important development. We actually only developed this, maybe it's only been a year, maybe a year and a half since we developed this particular search part. And it was really important because, again, we want everyone to feel like this is your space. This is your Beit Midrash. This is your Jewish space to come and to learn. And so it needs to be something that's approachable and feels like, wow, I could get answers to my questions just by typing things into the search bar.
Who were the Jebusites?
Who were the Jebusites? Good question. I wonder what would happen if we type that into the search bar. They're a nation that's a biblical nation that's mentioned, and probably also, it's not going to be as interesting as Jerusalem, but probably also if you type Jebusites in, it wants to search Yehoiakim. Could probably just search it as a word search in Sefaria. Yeah, it's not giving me a topics page.
It won't let you do it.
Well, it'll let me search it as a word, but it's not going to let me search it as a topic. I think probably because they're not like a big focus of Jewish people. But there we go, right? Here are the texts and here are the sheets about the Jebusites. So if you want to know more about that nation that inhabited the land of Canaan before we got there, they are in the list. So that's the really important search feature that we built. And the other thing that I want to tell you about this part of Sefaria, which I think is really exciting, is that in addition to the sources that you can see here, which are all, they're part of the Jewish bookshelf. So you're seeing a lot of Bible and you're seeing Talmud. And if we scroll down, eventually you would see more rabbinic works. That's what you're going to see on the sources tab. You can also click here to see sheets, and sheets are user-generated content. So anybody, all of you are invited. Anyone can come and log on to Sefaria and create their own materials. So when you go to a class and whoever's teaching the class gives you a source sheet, they give you a collection. I'm sure I have one in my papers around me somewhere here. They give you a collection of a few different sources on a piece of paper, maybe with some questions, maybe with a picture, maybe with their name on it. Those are source sheets. And anyone can come onto Sefaria and make a source sheet using our texts. Our texts are the building blocks, and we want everybody to be able to use them and kind of mix and match to create their own story. And so these are all the sheets that relate to Jerusalem. So if you're thinking to yourself, these biblical texts are great, but I don't really want to read about the ancient Jebusites, since I'm not really sure who they are, you could instead say, well, not so interested in that, but I am kind of interested in Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. I know that song, Jerusalem of Gold, and I'd like to find out more about that. And this is a sheet that actually comes from the National Library of Israel. They have a lot of sheets on our site because it's a great way for them to put together resources. And so this sheet has an embedded video of
Let's hear it.
Let's hear it. I don't know if it'll come across so well on the Zoom right now. I'm a little scared.
You'll hear it on Monday.
But you can hear it, yes, eventually. And then there's some descriptions. There's the text of the song, as well as the National Library wove this together with biblical sources. So there's a verse from Eicha, from Lamentations on here as well, and questions for reflection and some more context and understanding. This is pretty typical of what you might find on a sheet on Sefaria. It's multimedia because it's digital. So not like a paper source sheet that you actually get handed in a class. It can have embedded audio, video, etc., links, all those things. And of course, it has texts from within Sefaria. And it can also have things from outside Sefaria, like Nomi Shemer's song, which I don't think is actually part of our Sefaria library. But of course, it references texts that are part of our library. And so those are all woven together on the sheet. And again, I want to tell you, all of this it belongs to you. It doesn't belong to anybody else. So even though this sheet was made by the National Library of Israel, they made it and they put it on Sefaria so that everyone would have access to it. And that means that you can use it, you can print it. I mean, the song won't come out if you print it. You can share it with other people. Any one of us could teach a class from this sheet. It's all there for the taking. And that's really by design. Here's another one, City on a Hill. So here you can see there's embedded audio. This is a Chicago sheet, apparently, City on a Hill. And there's an embedded podcast, so you can actually listen to the class being taught, as well as you can see all of the texts that are here. But if you want to know what he actually does with the texts, you can listen to the embedded podcast. So there's a lot of different options on sheets, and we could keep scrolling for a long time, but I think you get the idea. This is where we host our user-generated content, and it's a really exciting way to see the ways in which people think about ancient texts, the way they're thinking about those texts, the way they're using those texts, the way they're applying those texts today. Probably my favorite side of Sefaria, and maybe David's also. Any questions before I go on?
I have two quick questions.
Sure.
So you can basically create a profile and then bookmark all these things for yourself, so you can come back to them over and over again. That's what the little star feature is there on the side, correct?
Yes. So you can, yep, exactly as you said. Any text that you find or any sheet that you find, you can star it. You need to be logged in order to do that. But once you create a profile and an account for yourself, you can star it, and then you can go to the main page and you'll find all of your saved text and all of your saved sheets. Yeah.
And then you might have mentioned this as well, but the search feature works with Hebrew as well?
The source, sorry, you said the search feature?
Yeah.
Yes, you can search in Hebrew. I didn't mention that, but you can. And in fact, when you click into the search bar, there's a little, I don't know, it must be, maybe it's tiny on my screen, sorry. Can you guys see that? There's a virtual keyboard interface. So you can click there to type in Hebrew if you don't have the capability on your computer to type in Hebrew.
Great, thank you.
Sure. And as you said, I think the bookmarking is exciting, but also to me, so you can save your own content. I like that. You can also share this content with a friend. And that's because, I mean, it's sort of obvious, but sort of not. Just the way if you're shopping on Amazon and you want to share that product with someone else, you want to like send them a link to buy it for you, you can do that. So because Sefaria, everything is it's just a website, it's online. So I can open up any text and send you the link, and then you'll be able to see the text that I'm seeing. So if I get really excited about one of these Jerusalem texts, let's try one of those again. The first text here, I did Jerusalem in the future. That's an even more exciting one. Okay, so Ezekiel, I can say I want all of you to be able to see this source with me. And so I'll just click up here in my browser, and this link, if you open it, you'll get the same text that I'm looking at, and the same goes for a sheet. That's why I was able to share the sheet with you. So you can save text for yourself. You can also share your learning with another person. And again, all of that is because this is completely digital. The other really important thing about Sefaria's texts is that they are interlinked. They're interconnected and interlinked so that you can kind of build your own, you can choose your own adventure through Jewish texts. So again, if I go to the search, this time I really am going to do Jerusalem, since I think that's mostly what you'll be learning about. So again, I'm selecting hashtag Jerusalem, and okay, let's try the first source, the Book of Psalms. Any text that you open is linked with other texts, and so if I just click on this verse, you'll see that the sidebar opens, And this sidebar has all of the links that Sefaria knows about, which are considerable. Commentary, other biblical links, Targum, Talmud, Midrash. We have our entire library interlinked. And so if you want to know who are the commentators who write on these verses in Psalms, you can read those. If you want to know, does the Talmud quote this verse in Psalms, you can click to read that. So I call it a choose your own adventure of Jewish texts, because I might open these verses and you might open these verses, but once we start clicking, we might not end up in the same place, because I might go to one resource and you'll go to another resource, and we could end up in very different places. And you can see, hopefully you can see the little EN button next to a text that indicates that it's something that we have in English. So when I click on Rashi, I know that Rashi is in English because it had the little EN. Rashi, you can see here, even without reading it, you can hopefully see that there are parenthetical references within the text. It's not unlike Rashi to quote, to comment on one verse, but quote other sources, whether biblical or rabbinic. And so if I click to open the Rashi, I can actually then click on that and find the sources that Rashi references. So the famous medieval commentator here, commenting on Psalms, makes reference to the book of Joshua. And I can actually see all three of those texts side by side. And there's no limit. I can keep going. Eventually the panels will get pushed off my screen, but I could start in the book of Psalms and end up in a commentary on the book of Joshua. And that's just with a few clicks. So it's a different form of search. It's another way of charting your path through the text. You need to have a starting point, but once you find that text that's your starting point, that's your hook, that takes you into the topic that you want to explore, then you can build out from that and just keep clicking to look at the links. Now, I don't think that those links were relevant particularly to Jerusalem. And if I wanted to figure out, well, does anyone talk about this in terms of Jerusalem per se, I might again look to the user-generated content. So here in the sidebar, you can also see sheets, that same user-generated content that I showed you earlier, but this will be source sheets that specifically quote this verse. So Jerusalem Anthology is one of the source sheets. So I can see, yeah, there are actually people who've taught about Jerusalem and used this verse to do so. One other resource that I want to show you on this sidebar piece before I pause for your questions again is what we call web pages. It's really important to us, again, at Sefaria to weave the modern in with the ancient. And we know that there are so many talented rabbis, people out there who are constantly creating and sharing new words of Torah. And we want to be able to include all of that on the site. We can't include all of that on one website. And so we built a linking system. Again, I think it's kind of magic. Our engineers built this also maybe around a year or two ago. And so if you click on web pages, you'll see an extensive list of other websites, other Jewish websites. And if they're listed here, it means that there's an article on that website that quotes this verse. So the Times of Israel blogs, or Eish HaTorah, the Jewish Virtual Library, the Jewish Standard, which is my hometown Jewish newspaper, the Jewish Exponent, which I think is Philadelphia's Jewish newspaper. All of these publications have articles that quote this verse, or they had them at some point. And so you can open any of these. We don't have this content actually hosted on our site, but you can click on any of these links to find that. And again, it's our hope that that will help you answer the question of how is this verse relevant in my life now? How are people nowadays, scholars nowadays, authors nowadays, writing about this ancient text? And you can find that by clicking to look at web pages in the sidebar. Okay, I'm pausing again for any questions.
Is there searching within the source sheets? There are so many.
So when you search, you can search, but you mean like once you get the source sheet results?
Yes.
Yeah, so you can filter them, but there's not like a within the search feature yet.
Okay. And what if I want to say, show me all of Educator Schwartz's source sheets? Can I do that?
Yeah, I'll just show you quickly that you can Well, okay, so you can't search topically within the source sheets, but when you click filter, you can sort them by relevance, views, or newest. And you can also, so like if, David, should we put you on the spot? Right, if you did have a source sheet here, I could search your name because I can search within the search bar. You don't, so who do we think definitely does? Okay, so I'm like searching myself. Sefaria has source sheets within this. So you can
Great.
search that way. And if you
Yep.
wanted to search for all of someone's source sheets, you can just use search bar. And here we go. There you are.
Oh, how cool is that? Thank you.
You're welcome. I think it's very cool. There you are. And here are all your public source sheets. And as long as we're on the topic, you can choose to click follow and follow David Schwartz or follow anyone. And you'll get actually an alert from Sefaria anytime they publish a public sheet, which is another way of Sefaria telling you that we want you to be engaged. We hope you'll be engaged with people who are actively creating Torah out there in the world. Were there any other questions?
Yes, I had a really elementary question. To go from a primary text, say in Tanakh, or could be Talmud, depending on the context, how you get to the commentaries? I know there's a way, but I didn't see how you get there. Suppose I have the text, the primary text. I want to see the different commentaries. How do I do that? Maybe you showed that already.
I did, but it's like I think it gets lost because it's hard to show because there's not like a button. I literally just clicked on the text. So you can't exactly see me do it because you can't see my mouse. You can just see
You
my
click
screen.
on the text and
Just
you get the,
and this sidebar opens.
I see.
So
Thank
any
you.
text view that you click on Sefaria will give you a sidebar. Not every sidebar will be, as robust depending on how interlinked the text is, but certainly for Talmud and Tanakh, you'll find, right? I just randomly open to a page and have all the commentaries and all the texts that are linked. Okay. Were there any other?
We
questions?
actually can see the mouse, so that's
You
we
can
can
see
see
my you can see my cursor, but you can't see my fingers on the trackpad.
Oh, got it.
You can't see me clicking. Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, we've had this before in making demo videos that it's like hard. Clicking is actually a hard thing to show on a screen, but hopefully that makes it clear. Were there any other questions? Okay. One other thing that I'll mention about our text, because I just think it's so great, is that we also have dictionaries built into the site. Hopefully we'll get more in the future, but to begin with, I mean, obviously we have a lot of text in English as well. So any text that you're in, you can select what language you want to see it in. English, Hebrew and English, or all Hebrew. This Aleph A button will give you all your layout settings, as well as things like whether you want vocalization and the font size, which I'll make a little bigger to be easier on your eyes. But it's also the case that with the sidebar open, I can click and drag to highlight a word, and Sefaria will look it up for me in the dictionary. So there's a biblical dictionary, there's a Talmud dictionary, the Jasper dictionary is on here. And we also have the Klein dictionary, which is a modern Hebrew dictionary. So 3 dictionaries, maybe more to come, maybe more languages to come. But I think that's a fun thing. I think I experience it as, even if I'm using the English, but the English isn't a word for word translation. It's a readable translation, not a word for word translation. And so it is fun sometimes to click and drag just to see what the actual word is, if I'm wondering about a particular word in a text. Again, hopefully we'll build in even more dictionaries over time, but I wanted you to know that that exists.
Another thing that I think is not possible is it's not like having a book on your phone or Kindle or what have you, where you can highlight it and save that, correct?
So
you could save a text as a sheet and then highlight it, I suppose.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, right. You can't highlight it in the reader, but you can put it on a sheet and then highlight it that way. Or do whatever else you want with it once it's on your sheet. The third thing that I wanted to talk to you about tonight, and this gets us a little closer into this Jerusalem topic, is about Torah as data, which is to say that once we digitized all these texts, there were a lot of things that we could do with them. So as I'm searching for Jerusalem through the text on the site, and this, what we mentioned earlier, you can save texts, you can add them to your favorites, you can save sheets. And so I might really decide I'm going to just sort of browse through which are my favorite texts about Jerusalem. I'm going to see which ones speak to me, which ones seem relevant. Maybe I'll just star each one and put it in my saved. Maybe, as you mentioned, maybe I'll make a source sheet, which is you need to be logged in. And it's kind of a level 2 class. Maybe my colleague Loren will talk more about that next week. But it basically means that I can just gather bits and pieces of things as I go through and put them onto a sheet. And then I'll have them saved for later. And if you want to know at the end of the day, like what Torah have I learned, Sefaria has a Torah tracker. If you're logged in your account, you can see. This is going to take a second to load because I do a lot of Torah on Sefaria. But Sefaria will show you the Torah that you've learned over time. And it will show you where you've been the most, where you've been the least, the things that you've spent time on, the things that you've created, the things that you've favorited. And you have the option of year to date or all time. The truth is, it doesn't, you might not feel like you're in a competition to learn the most Bible, or you might feel that you are. But it's fun to be able to see. I'm sorry, because my Zoom is really slowing down my internet. So you might have to go to it afterwards and click on it. Oh, there we go. But this is just enables you to kind of get a sense of where have you been and where have you not been. So lest you be too impressed, I share this account with 3 other educators at Sefaria. So we've read in year to date 11,027 texts, which is a lot. But I really like this one the most, which is your top categories. So it'll tell you how you compare to the average Sefaria user. So you can see that we have collectively studied more Talmud than the average Sefaria user, but we have collectively studied less Tanakh than the average Sefaria user, and et cetera, as well as our favorite texts and our favorite sheets and our most popular sheets that we have made with our account. So that's one of the things that happens when you take the text and put them not into book form, but into data form. And so if I had spent a lot of time on Jerusalem, you'd be able to see that reflected in my categories. And maybe I would have favorited some more texts about Jerusalem. And maybe I would have sheets here that were about Jerusalem. And I could really build a portfolio over time. So it's not just about a one-time learning experience, but I could decide that Jerusalem is going to be my project for days, weeks, months, years. You could probably spend a lot of time on the site learning about Jerusalem. The other thing that happens because we transform these texts into data is that sometimes we can do fun things with that data, and sometimes we do. And so I'm back on Sefaria's main library page, which you can always get to with the 3 lines in the corner of the screen. So that's that little sandwich takes you back to the main library page. One of the options, if you scroll past the text in the calendar, under resources, we have something called visualizations. Visualizations are pictures that our engineers made using the data in our site. And I was so excited when David asked me to speak a little bit about Jerusalem, because, did you know this, David? Did you know this when you asked me? We have this the visualization, we call it our Jerusalem garden. And it's a garden. It was curated and translated by a rabbi in Israel, Mike Foyer. He's a very talented educator. He teaches at Pardes in Jerusalem. And he went through sources on Jerusalem. I know it's probably very small on my screen. And he sorted the sources by, or he labeled them, I should say, by tags, so different topical tags, by the names used for Jerusalem. So you might know Jerusalem can be referred to as Jerusalem, or Zion, or Moriah, or City of David. These are all synonyms for Jerusalem. There's different time periods referenced. There are characters referenced in relationship to Jerusalem. And that actually I thought was interesting when we first did the search, that actually, I've forgotten, Jerusalem is alluded to in the book of Genesis. So it comes up already in the time of Abraham. But obviously you're going to have many more references once you get around to King David. He's more closely associated with Jerusalem, but you could sort by character, as well as geography. Which part of Jerusalem are you most interested in? You can see there's a lot of sources for the temple because texts that write about Jerusalem are often writing about the temple. And then there's also the ability to sort these sources chronologically. So you could decide you want to see all sources ever about Jerusalem, but you might not want to do that. And so all of these filters are adjustable. I might just want to know about Zion as a name of Jerusalem. And if I click on that, it will filter out everything that doesn't use the name Zion. And then I could decide I only want Zion as referencing creation. And then I could decide that I only want texts that were written post the year 1000. So I can click and drag there to select. And really you can kind of zero in on, well, I wanted to know about Jerusalem, but what exactly do I want to know about Jerusalem? Now, I'll be honest with you. I am not sure in this very moment what it is that I most want to know about Jerusalem. I mean, I have some preferences. Like I'm not as interested in the time to come. I think I'm more interested in the past. And I do find the creation tag very interesting. So sometimes you might have something specific in mind, and sometimes you might just come to play. We called this a garden so that you wouldn't know what it was, and you would want to do what people do in gardens, which is to walk around, to look at things, to play, to explore. And so that's the hope for what you'll do in this garden. And once again, all of these sources are within our library. So you can click to open any of them. And then again, it starts your journey. So you maybe don't only want the verse, maybe you also want to see the commentaries, etc. And of course, you might want to see the source sheets that people created to go along with these sources. I'm pausing again for any questions.
Sarah, didn't you give us another explanation at one point about Sefaria in one of our other classes?
Maybe, yes.
Yeah, I think you did. I remember your voice.
Yeah, remember the one that showed the
Yeah.
swooping lines
Right.
from
Swooping line.
Yeah,
My
from
husband
book
said
to
he
book.
recognized your voice, and
I
Yeah,
will show
it
you the
was
swooping
a
line.
different visualization method.
right. Aha.
The link was it the link explorer? Yes, this was it. This was
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
one.
it's also
Yeah.
going to take a second to load.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it's another example. I'm so glad you remembered. I know this one's memorable. It's another example of what happens when you turn texts into data. I know the lines are going to take a minute to come through because they always come through the slowest. My computer's really not happy with this running Zoom thing right now. The question here was, what was sort of enabled by the fact that we have all those links in the sidebar that I showed you. So I showed you earlier, any text, let's say the Talmud, that you open up, you can find all the biblical verses that are referenced there just by clicking on Tanakh. And to be clear, that's a very ancient, not very ancient, that is not true, but it's an old kind of footnoting system, right? For a long time, Jews have known when the Talmud quotes a verse from the Bible. It's just that the way to see that was, someone mentioned before, the way things look in books. The way to see that in a book would be to just see it referenced on the side of the page. So you could get a sense of the verses, and then the really fancy modern versions of the Talmud will have not just the reference, but they'll have the entire verse printed in the side of the, like in the margin of the page. But you still can't get that kind of bird's eye view of, well, how much is actually quoted. And people started pretty early on asking us those questions, like, how many times might Jerusalem be referenced in, say, the Talmud? How many times do different books connect? So, oh, now I annoyed it because I clicked on something else. So if these lines ever populate, you'll be able to see how much Numbers connects, the book of Numbers connects to the entire Talmud. Or you can click in to see specific links and how they line up. So we actually, I think since the last time I spoke to you, we built out more versions of this. So not just Tanakh and Talmud, but the way that other texts connect within the site. So for example, Maimonides' Mishneh Torah and the Talmud, or Tanakh and Midrash Rabbah, which is a Midrashic collection. All of these things, I'm not waiting for them to load because it could take a while, but all of these things, we visualized the different connections, and we continue to build out different visualizations which again, we can do. The more data we take in, the more of these visualizations we can build. So we have one that represents our entire library. We have a responsa anthology. We have some linking through Rashi. It's fun for me to see these because some of them were not all of them were made by our engineers. Sometimes we have users who decide to make these visualizations. That would not be me, but I'm told that it's actually not that difficult. Anyone who wants to can access Sefaria's data. And so anyone who knows how to build with these tools can build their own visualization. And sometimes we then put those on the site. Other questions about any of that? So again, you can store your favorite Torah on Sefaria. You can keep tabs on your own learning on Sefaria, and you can play with our visualizations and see what you discover. What I want to challenge you to think about. So I used Jerusalem as my model search, but I don't want to say you're not interested in it. You might have other compelling interests besides just wanting to learn more about Jerusalem and its associated texts. So you could think about, what do you want to search in Sefaria's search bar? And I'll show you, maybe it sounds terrible to say, but my favorite current search on Sefaria, just as an example, I'm not happy that it exists. If you searched for COVID on Sefaria, hashtag COVID will come up as a topic. And it brings you to the coronavirus page, which is my favorite because I think you probably already know that coronavirus isn't a word that shows up in any traditional Jewish text. And so it's kind of amazing that we have this page on Sefaria. This page has existed since like by the end of last March. I think actually by the middle of last March, we already had this page because our search algorithm draws primarily from the sheets that people create. And people were creating source sheets about COVID, I guess by the middle of March last year. Certainly by the end of March and by April, this was a very well-populated space. And so when you click on sheets here, you can see many, many sheets. Is there a moral lesson from COVID-19? The Torah of sheltering in place, dealing with anxiety, dealing with plague, the Jewish response to pandemics, for times of isolation and plague, all these things that people were thinking and feeling and teaching about and wanting to learn about, including in other languages that I don't speak. You can see that people were creating this Torah, and then our algorithm draws out the sources that people quote so that we have like a pretty robust collection of, if you wanted to speak about plague, if you wanted to speak about coronavirus, what are the Torah sources that you would start with? And we know our algorithm is pretty good for this because I don't know if it'll work on this one, but as a general rule, when you look at the web pages, you'll start to also see patterns in the web pages that people were writing about plague, right? So COVID, corona, right? Pandemic. So it wasn't just people on Sefaria who were using these particular sources to write about COVID. It was also everybody else on the internet, or not everybody, but lots of other people on the internet were also using these same sources to write about that subject. And so I say that it's my favorite because I think it speaks to the power of the tools of Sefaria, that any topic that we decide is Torah is going to be populated on Sefaria. So yeah, searching for Jerusalem, that's an actual word that comes up in actual Jewish texts. But you can also search for things like coronavirus or food justice or social justice, right? Words that in and of themselves maybe don't show up in traditional Jewish texts, but that people write about, that people speak about, people think about, and so you can find the sources that are associated with those. Any questions about that? No. Okay. So to close, I just want to take you through some of the resources that we have on the site, and then I'll repeat my challenge to you, and maybe David will help make sure that you do your homework. One of my colleagues will be in this slot next week, so he can check back on you. But I wanted you to have a place to start with Sefaria. So a link to our website. We have very robust FAQ section. hello@sefaria.org is the email address to use to ask questions or sign up to receive our emails. It's very, very well staffed. You'll get pretty quick answers. We have Sefaria 101 webinars on the site that you can watch. You can sign up for an account. Again, if you want to be able to do some of the things that I referenced, like saving texts, like your Torah tracker, like making source sheets, all of those things you can do if you have an account, as well as links to the Android and iOS apps. So again, I think these are all resources that you can use when you start to delve into the site. Your educator is a Sefaria expert, a Sefaria master, far and wide acknowledged, at least by my team. But I and anyone on my team would also be happy to help if you get stuck. Again, the question is, what would you type into this search bar? What is it that you want to know more about in the world of Torah? That's like step one. And then I think level 2 is once you open up one of those texts, where do you go next? You can think of it as kind of like a giant Google, or I guess it's a smaller version of Google, but it's Jewish text specific. So people sometimes say to me, but there's so much information on Sefaria. There is, and it's kind of like the internet in that way, that you're going to get tons and tons of results. The challenge will be to move through them, and you might make guidelines for yourself in terms of where you start. Maybe you only want biblical text. Maybe you only want text from the Talmud. Maybe you want to go straight to the web pages and look at the current Torah being created. Maybe you'll find a favorite website that quotes, or that's quoted on Sefaria. The truth is the websites in the sidebar both quote Sefaria and are quoted by. The links go in both directions. So if you have a favorite Torah-related website that you didn't see in our sidebar and you want to let us know about that, we're happy to try to link to that also. Really, anyone with a Torah blog could, in theory, be linked on this site. They just have to run a piece of code. So you can set your own parameters in terms of what's the Torah that you want to find on the site, and then go for it and see what you find. And again, if you sign up for an account, you can then start to save those pieces of things. And that could be not necessarily because you've decided to teach a class, but because you're interested in a topic and you collect things over time. Or maybe you study the weekly Torah portion every week, and you can just grab your favorite piece from the Torah portion every week, and just save that over time. At the end of the year, you'll have your assortment of favorite verses from the Bible or favorite verses from the Torah all in one source sheet. And maybe you will decide to teach that at Simchat Torah 1 year, or maybe you'll just have it for your own collection. So I hope that you'll experiment and try to collect sources on Sefaria. And I will be happy to answer any last questions that you have. There was one question. Yeah, go ahead.
I see on the Torah texts, I don't see the trope, the cantillation marks. Are there versions with the trope in Sefaria?
Yes, so you can click, I'm just going to close the sidebar so you can see it more clearly. When you click the Aleph A button in the top corner, you can decide how you'd like to see the text. So you can choose with cantillation, or no cantillation but vocalization, or just plain text. You can select those options, as well as selecting Hebrew English and the layout. I always put my bilingual layout this way, but you could decide you want it stacked, so one verse on top of the other, or that you want it the other kind of side by side. I like it this way. And as well as, the font size and the languages and all of that.
Thank you very much. It's been so extraordinarily lucid. Thank you.
I have 2 questions. One is, how do you get any work done when you can just play with this all day long? And the other is, you forgot to mention about the donate $10 a month thing, which I got lured into doing, and I'm so glad.
Right. So it's probably not good to not mention the fundraising piece. You're right. Thank you. You must also work for a nonprofit. Yes. So Sefaria exists on, well, okay, I'll do that in order. I don't know if I ever get any work done, but this is my job. So that's really good. But I routinely talk to people who, for some reason, this is the image that everyone uses. Everyone always tells me about going down the Sefaria rabbit hole. So that's like, no matter who I talk to, they're like, oh, today I went down the Sefaria rabbit hole. So that is definitely something that happens and happens to me also. And we are a nonprofit. We do subsist on donations. We want to think of Sefaria as kind of like a utility, that it's just going to be here for everybody always when you need it. And we did, I don't know if we just started it, but we've just kind of started asking for people to join our sustainers program, where you give $10 a month and then you're part of our sustainers program and get things like invitations to our events and also our undying love and gratitude. And we've been really very fortunate in being able to fundraise from foundations. And really, it's great to have a mission that you're passionate about. And that's something that Sefaria, we really have going for us. We really, really want the Torah to belong to everybody. And that's strong, but we do need people to chip in order for that to keep happening. So I think like every page on Sefaria has a donate button somewhere. Definitely on our homepage, if you scroll down, you can find the option to donate. We also have a Sefaria swag shop. So if you've been liking my mug tonight, we do have a Sefaria swag store where you can purchase those things. And as long as I'm down here, you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and things like that. And I'll mention our emails also, which is part of the reason why I don't get any work done, but also why it's part of my job, which is that we regularly send out resources for people to learn. Again, thinking that there's a lot of people who are interested in Torah writ large, but maybe don't know where to start. We like to give people a place to start. And it really is a big site, but that's because the Jewish Library is actually massive. And we want to kind of invite people into that. Oh, thank you for putting that link into the chat. So you can sign up to receive our newsletters, and we'll update you on things like new texts, which we're constantly still adding texts. So our newest additions, we just added the Lieberman Tosefta, which is a really important rabbinic work that it's a scholarly work that we didn't have for a long time, and now we do. And we are about to add an English translation of the Jerusalem Talmud, which is a big deal for those who care, because it does exist in English, but it's not sort of standard to own. And it's big and it's huge, and people don't study the Jerusalem Talmud as much. So like fewer people are able to make their way through it without an English translation. I probably could not. And so that's going to be really exciting and presents a lot of really also fun opportunities to link between the Jerusalem Talmud and the Babylonian Talmud, which I think will be really fun and exciting. And we also have a major initiative right now around adding Torah by women to the website. So we recently added a book by Dr. Aviva Zornberg, which is called Moses. And that is a new book on the site. And I can't tell you yet, but we are adding 7 new works by women in the coming 1 to 2 years. So that's really exciting. So you can stay tuned for that.
Any Nechama Leibowitz?
We have all of Nechama Leibowitz's source sheets on the site.
Source sheets.
So she actually wrote source sheets. Like that is actually what she wrote. The books that came later were compilations of her writing, but her family, her niece and great nephew who live in, there's other members of the family, but those are the ones that I know who live in Jerusalem. They were compiling all of her source sheets. That's what she sent out to her students on a regular basis. In Hebrew, they're called Gilyonot. And the family had all of those. And so those were her source sheets with her questions and her answers. And here you can see it here. This image at the top here is actually, it's a picture of her mimeographed source sheets, right? That's how she sent them out. So this is what it actually looked like. And you can filter them and search them. And they're all here on the site. Not all of them are translated into English yet. We'd like to do more of that work, but she definitely does have a home on our site.
Thank you.
Sure. Any last questions? stop sharing so I can see all of your lovely faces.
Thank
Okay,
you
well,
for
thank
such
you
a-
so much. This was so much fun to get to see you all.
Thank you for such a
And-
lucid.
Thank you,
and
Sarah.
Wonderful. Just great. Thank you so much.
Remarkable,
Thank
really.
you so much. All right. Thank you, David, for inviting me. It's always fun to be with your community. Someday in person, guys, I really hope one of these days I'll make it out to the suburbs again. But
Next year in the living room.
I know, right? Exactly. Next year in person, but this year it's been really great to see you all. So thank you so much.